real quick before we get started, Mr. DM man, how do you pronounce this coworker's name of yours? Krisa something.
Krisa.
No, how do you say
Krisa.
the last name?
Lasombra? I mean,
There
that's
is
not her
no,
last name.
there is
Oh,
no
is she
B
in
in
chat?
there. Yes, she's in chat.
Oh, is she in chat? Krisa, I honestly, I don't know how to say her last name.
Hello and welcome back to a Squirrel Plays. Today we're going to be having a look at a piece of ttrpg software called RPG Stories, and if you haven't heard about it, don't be too surprised because they're kind of the new kid on the block and they got some big ambitions. Now, I did mention this software in my VRPGs video because messing around with it was what initially gave me the idea for that video. I've also streamed some building in it, and honestly, I meant to do more by this point, but we'll just throw that into the pile of projects the squirrel keeps abandoning. And me and Avenue Studios were also blessed with this company's community manager to run a game for us in their software, which was an awful lot of fun. But more on that later. If you missed the stream, make sure to go back and check it out. And if you're wondering how I am connected to all of this and what I'm getting out of it personally, allow me to fill you in. If you remember a few videos back, I did one on a new TTRPG called Dim Day Red, and if you didn't watch that, then huge shame on you. It actually looks to be a very neat game. Anyway, Mr. Drakatos originally reached out to me about the game, and I made a video about it. After the video's release, Krisa, this name, joined my Squirrely Discord and reached out to me. She said not only am I an incredibly handsome squirrel, but that she enjoyed the video and appreciated me doing it because she had been doing some community work for Mr. Drakatos on that project. We chatted a bit, and she then went on to say that she's a dev for this little project called RPG Stories and wanted to know if I'd like to try it out. And let me tell you something about myself real quick. When somebody offers me something for free, my squirrely brain takes absolutely nothing into consideration. Do I need it? Don't care. Do I want it? Don't care. Do I have anywhere to put it? Don't care. Do I have time for it? Do not care. So I said, you bet. And here we are. Now, this is not a paid promotion, but I have been given multiple keys so me and some friends could play, as well as some extra keys to give away to you guys, plus the Kickstarter link is an affiliate link just like an Amazon one. But with that said, please kickstart at your own risk. I'm just here to show you what I can so you can make a more informed decision for your hard-earned dollars. So in other words, I ain't rich yet. One day though. Now let's get into this thing and see what it can do and what my impressions of it are so far. Okay, so right off the top, what is this thing exactly? What is RPG Stories? Is it a map maker? Is it a VTT? Is it something else? Yes, the answer is yes. Aren't I helpful? The goal is for it to be both a 3D map maker and a 3D VTT. Right now, it's mostly a map maker and technically a playable VTT in the sense it does not have many features on that side yet. Yes, other players can join, yes, players can roll dice, and yes, players can move the characters around, but that's about it. Right now, there's not even any character sheets at the moment, but that is part of the big update that is coming our way. Now, you all know I like hanging around and making maps. It's one of my preferred pastimes on stream, and we've had a lot of fun in the process. I personally find it relaxing, and it's a good little creative outlet for me. So it probably comes as no surprise to any of you, the map making was the first thing I tried in this tool. And you know what? It was a lot of fun. It was really, really enjoyable. Now, because you're in a 3D environment, it does take a little bit longer to make maps, depending on how you go about it. You can technically just plop down a whole house, or you can take the time to make the walls, hang things on the wall, fill the rooms with all the furniture and everything you can think of, and all that good stuff. You can technically spend an awful lot of time just working on one single and small map. But, as I said, you don't have to. There are ways around that, and I don't mean just skipping the process or cutting corners. One way, and probably the easiest way, other than just not doing it, is to use what other people have made. RPG Stories benefits greatly from the Steam Workshop. You can conjure up and modify your own combination of assets into a group and save it as what they call a custom object. The fine folks over at Brave Alice Games really encourage you to make these custom objects and share it on the workshop for others to use. And honestly, it is pretty great. Maybe you enjoy making caverns and other natural landscapes, but don't like making houses and buildings. You can just hop into the workshop and grab a blacksmith's forge if you want and drop it down. And of course, should something need a little bit of editing, you can break the group and edit your pieces as need be. But using that same feature, here's something to consider and keep in the back of your noggin. Your custom objects are saved locally, so no matter which map you're working on, you have access to those custom objects you've made. That means the more maps you make, the quicker it will get over time, not only because you're getting faster and more familiar with the software, but also because you'll be building up your own personal library of assemblies, or custom objects, whatever you want to call them. I keep calling them assemblies because of some other software I'm used to, and I will actually talk a little bit about that towards the end of the video. So take this barrel of spears I made, for example. Yes, it took me a while to meticulously place each one of those spears in the barrel and make it look halfway decent, but now I can save that group and use it over and over and over again wherever I want. I did the same thing for this fire pit contraption. I made a ring of rocks, saved that as a group, then stacked up multiple rings until I had the pit I wanted, which I then saved as another object. It's pretty darn neat, I think, and again, I find it really enjoyable. I was actually up late the night before writing this, just making an alchemy bench. I started with this basic table from the assets, then added everything else that you see here. I had no reason to make it other than I wanted to, but should I work on some fantasy maps in the future, I have an alchemy bench ready to go that I can just throw down with a couple clicks. And really, I could go on about the features this thing has for a very long time. I could talk about how nice the search feature is when looking for assets and the tagging system to keep things sorted, and all the little tips and tricks and the ins and outs, but I'm not going to do that for a couple reasons. One, there are already other videos out there highlighting just that. I'm not the only YouTuber Brave Alice Games reached out to, and I've watched some of the reviews and they do talk about those things, so me doing it would just be redundant. And the second reason is I would rather point out just how easy this thing is to use, because that's what I find to be more important. Features, tricks, bells, and whistles are all well and good, but if you have to dig through a 100-page wiki to figure it all out, I don't particularly consider that very helpful or useful. RPG Stories does a very good job of keeping things simple while allowing you the freedom to make it as complicated as you want. Again, this alchemy bench did not have to be near this complicated. I did not have to spend the time I did putting this together. It was purely by choice. A bad choice maybe, but my choice. Now on the other hand, have a look at ye old hobgoblin and the dungeon he made for us to play a session in. Now, granted, this man does have 500 hours in the software, so yeah, he knows his way around it a bit better than your average person, but we still had a little chat about the dungeon he made. It was a pretty snazzy sewer dungeon, and he said it only took him about an hour to throw it together. Yeah, and the time I made a table, he made an entire sewer dungeon to explore. Granted, he did have to pull in some extra help to get it done in time before the session, so somebody else made this workshop at the end, but still, that's pretty darn fast. It was a lot faster than I was expecting, even with his level of experience. Now, he did say that if he was just starting out in RPG Stories and did this whole thing, including the workshop at the end, it probably would have taken him over a week by spending an hour or two a day on it. But the more you use it, the faster you get just by getting used to it, like I said, but also your custom library will continue to grow like his, as you can see, which allows more and more shortcuts. So while I'd say the learning curve is relatively small, there is an adjustment period and things to get used to because, hey, it's a fairly different environment than your usual VTT, right? And I'm just going to throw a ton of the features on the board here to give you an idea of what it has, and if you see something that particularly interests you, you know what to dig more into. But again, while features are all well and good, you're probably wondering how well it actually performs in real practice. So let's have the real talk. Let's make the developers watching this sweat a little bit. Are you ready for this? It actually did a whole lot better than I thought it would. I was impressed. I'm going to be completely honest as possible here. While I enjoyed building in this thing, I did not have high hopes for it actually performing when it came to playtime. And I even made the comment to a couple friends of mine that I didn't really see myself using it in the future to play games in. I thought it would be too slow or too clunky and would bring down the usual TTRPG flow. And since I'm sharing my negativity here, I will also point out that when Krissa originally joined the Squirrel Discord, I did see the link to RPG Stories in her profile. I went and checked it out on my own before she even spoke to me about it, and my first thought when I watched the trailer and read over it was, seems ambitious. I liked the idea of it, but was not initially too impressed, but that's not because their presentation was lacking. That's because I've seen plenty of projects on Steam Early Access never amount to anything, and the same goes for Kickstarter. While I can't say I own an Ouya console, I can say that I backed Mighty No. 9 back in the day, and we all know how that one turned out.
Right to jail, right away.
I've watched Kickstarter and Early Access games over the years, and yeah, it's made the Squirrel more than a bit jaded. And if you've read through Brave Alice Games' promotions, you will notice something they like to highlight. They had one Kickstarter before, and they followed through on all their promises. Sadly, they're right to bring that up as much as possible because that's the world we live in. We live in a hellscape of unfinished early access projects and undelivered promises. So when somebody comes along and actually does what they say they're going to do in a sea of fully funded but undelivered projects, it's noteworthy. Needless to say, when Krissa reached out, I was cautious. She was so excited to talk about the project and was telling me all about it and how passionate they all are to work on it. And while this may be my first YouTube rodeo, I've been in this position more than a few times when someone's trying to sell me on just how ambitious and dedicated they are to a project. I've also had to let go more than a few people because their supposed ambition and dedication was nowhere to be found when it came time to actually get some work done. And I tell you all of that so you'll understand my point of view and hopefully understand the weight of my words when I tell you that so far, I am impressed with what I have seen. I've been lurking in their Discord server for several weeks at this point, and their engagement with their community is fantastic. I've seen people come in and ask a question, unsure if they were even experiencing a bug or not, or if they just boogered something up themselves, and these devs jump on it like flies on shit. They'll patch it up and fix it as quick as possible, or guide you through a solution until a fix can be properly pushed out. More than once, I have caught Krissa working on it in the wee hours of 4 a.m., and I imagine the others are the same way. They've been incredible to work with, and yes, I understand that I am the influencer here, which feels so weird to say, but let's be real. I'm rocking a whole 1,500 subs, alright? I'm not exactly rolling in it when it comes to fame and fortune. But every time I reach out, they're more than willing to take the time and talk. Me and Krissa have even done a couple brainstorms together, which, by the way, pretty sure this billboard reward was my idea, and I expect a 15% cut for everyone that pledges at those levels. Just saying. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you always pay your squirrels. Like and subscribe for more pro tips from the wizard. But in all seriousness, I am pleased with what I'm seeing. They're really nice people. The community is pretty great. People are sharing their creations left and right. They're squashing bugs as much as they can, and I haven't been able to keep up with all the updates that have been rolling out since I was introduced to this thing. Granted, they have been in super crunch mode since the Kickstarter got going and their director decided to go and make a little gremlin. Congratulations, by the way. So they've been a bit more focused than social the past few days, but that's perfectly understandable. And besides, I personally don't expect the devs to be social since that's not really their job, but that does seem to be an expectation for most people these days. So as I sit here writing this, I'm realizing this video is going to be entirely too long. I'm trying to hit up some points that other reviewers and promotions aren't, so it doesn't get redundant. So allow me to try and just rapid fire some positives about the game we ran, and then I'll talk a little bit about some pain points. The actual game session, as I mentioned before, went buttery smooth. Yes, it was run by a guy that had lots of hours in the software, so he knew his way around it, but all of the players in the party had essentially zero experience in the software, and we had no issues. We were able to move, roll dice, do our thing, and have a really great time without any setbacks. Well, I say no issues and setbacks, but DM Tails couldn't even get his to launch, but that's because he uses a Mac, and we all know those are garbage anyway. But in the end, that actually worked out really great because he was playing a directionally challenged archer, and since he couldn't see anything we were seeing ourselves, it made it all the better. And on that note, their community manager Hobgoblin, or Alex if you prefer, did a fantastic job as a GM. He made characters for us ahead of time and gave them all silly quirks to work with, and then designed traps throughout the dungeon based off those quirks. It was really great, and I highly encourage you to watch the stream. It was really cool to be able to see the 3D environments. We didn't have to ask the GM how wide a hallway was, or how tall the ceilings were, or how far down a drop was, because we were able to see all that on screen. When cave-ins happened, he could easily just drop a pile of rubble to block our path, or make pillars rise up from the ground, and he could add in magical effects when we used abilities, make the screen red when the squirrel went blind with rage.
Demon?
Ow, it's all red!
Oh, look at that!
I'm just really surprised at how smoothly the whole thing went down, and I do acknowledge the fact a fair amount of that is due to Hobgoblin not only having the software experience, but also being a good GM. But even with that in mind, again, I was expecting things to go so much more slowly with this software. And yes, we even played D&D 5e. I am saying I had a good time while playing 5e. Granted, we did ignore most of the rules, and I did make fun of it a few times, and the rule was everybody had to take a drink when I did make fun of it, but we still managed to get through the night without getting totally plastered, somehow. It was a great time, and it ran just as smoothly, if not smoother, than any other VTT I've used. But it had the extra benefit of being three-dimensional. Even if that's not your thing, I'd encourage you to try it at least once. And on that note, let me hop over to some of my pain points. And my first pain point is the entry fee. It's a bit steep, but at the same time, not really. It just feels steep because it's something you're not used to. A lot of us use Roll20, which is completely free, for the most part. Or if you're like me, you're in love with Foundry, which is a whole $50, but only the GM has to buy it. Anybody and everyone can join the GM and not have to spend a nickel. RPG Stories, on the other hand, has a GM version for purchase and a player version. The GM version is $36 on Steam in the US, and the player version is $19. And if I'm understanding this correctly, which there's a good chance I'm not because I get confused every time I try to read up all the details, the GM version is the full thing that lets you build, play, run games, all that good stuff. The player version only lets you join other games and do a limited amount of building. Considering Foundry is $50, I think I'd rather RPG Stories be in the $50 to $60 range, maybe even a little more, and let other players join for free. $19 to only be able to join seems like a weird call when the full package is $36. Not sure why you wouldn't just go for the GM version. That said, though, there is a Kickstarter tier that does grant you the ability to invite people to play for free an unlimited amount of times, so maybe in the future we'll see that option. Anyway, that's definitely something to consider and something I wager prevents a lot of people from just trying it. It's a lot easier for a GM to convince his group to try a new VTT when he's the only one paying for it. Ask me how I know. Another pain point I experienced was a lack of assets, and not total number, but specific ones. And really, this is probably only a temporary pain point because more assets will be added as time goes on. But for right now, there's some decisions I'm not sure I understand. Surprisingly, there are no gemstones. Not that I could find anyway. There's a couple crystals, but nothing like emeralds or rubies or sapphires. You know, the shiny things that squirrels like. And speaking of, there's no dang squirrels. Yet, for some reason, we have laundry detergent. Really, though? That's about it for pain points. Technically, there are more, like the lack of certain animations, but they're things that are already getting worked out or on the roadmap to be implemented, and with the progress they've been making, I don't doubt they will be. Most of my pain points are the things you expect to see in an early access piece of software. Alright, hello, hi from the editing room. I'm already up to my neck in this video, but I just recently found something out yesterday, and I wanted to make sure this was clear, so apologies for making this already too long video a little bit longer. This whole time, I was under the impression that all of these Kickstarter updates, or at least the ones like VTT exporting and procedural scene generation, were going to be updates that came to the base game. And the Kickstarter was a way to help justify and fund that operation. Turns out, it's actually going to be a DLC package for the base game. That means if you own RPG Stories already and don't invest in the Kickstarter, then you will have to buy this expansion separately, and the price has not yet been determined. Now, that might be on me for misunderstanding, and I should reiterate that they have been adding things to RPG Stories already. I've seen a couple updates get pushed through Steam just in my short time of owning it. That said, while I may not be the most intelligent creature on the planet, I'd like to think I'm at least honest. And since this is my video, I got two things to say about this. One, I'm not exactly crazy about it. I understand money is a thing and you gotta earn it to make ends meet, but when your base game is still in early access on Steam and you have this note on your store page, I'm not convinced this is the best way. I feel like it would have been better to put things like asset packs and pre-made missions and whatnot behind paid DLCs. But when functionality like character sheets and VTT exporting gets locked behind a paid DLC, that seems a little bit dicey to me. No pun intended. And Brave Alice Games, I know you're watching this because you're very good about following up with your community. If there's anything you'd like to clarify about what is and isn't included in regular free updates for your base game for those who already own it, please do comment and I will pin it so everyone can find it easily and there will be no confusion. And the second thing was that I wanted to remind you what all I said about the game when we played with Hobgoblin. We didn't have any of these features, we used the base game as is, and we did have an absolute blast. Our playing wasn't handicapped by any means, and things went very smoothly. So take that for what it's worth, and let's get back to the rest of the video. Now, when it comes to building and the way the controls and tools function, I have a list about a mile long of things I could say, but I won't because that wouldn't be fair. And why wouldn't that be fair? You remember way back in the beginning of this video when I said I was used to another piece of software? Well, let me give you a quick glimpse into that. Y'all going to learn something about the squirrel today. This is called SolidWorks, and what is known as parametric solid modeling software, which is very different from the 3D modeling most people have seen. It's what you use in the engineering and manufacturing world. You create models and assemblies of anything from nuts, bolts, bone screws, washers, cars, rocket ships, circuit boards, pipes, an entire oil rig, you name it. If it exists and can be made, you model it in here. Piece by piece, you build whatever you want and then go on to run an FEA on it or program your CNC to start machining parts. While there is a different goal in mind, both of these softwares have a bit of overlap when it comes to navigating a 3D building environment. Now, I bragged about Hobgoblin a few times and how fluent his 500 hours made him. I have logged between 15 and 20,000 hours in this software, and that's actually running it and using it, not just having it open on my computer. Needless to say, I'm more than a bit familiar with it, and I'm used to working in a 3D modeling environment, so naturally, I have some thoughts and opinions on that part. But here's the thing. This not only requires specialized training, but costs several $1,000s to buy and then thousands more per license each year to maintain updates and service. On top of that, it's had hundreds, if not thousands, of devs work on it over the course of 29 years and still going. As of 2013, the program had 12 million lines of code and yearly updates, adding an average of 1 million new lines per update. This cost $36 one time, has only a few devs, and just came out last November. Me making critiques about navigating the 3D space in RPG Stories would be like driving nothing but Lamborghinis my whole life, then offering an opinion on a Toyota Camry. Yes, technically, they're both cars and go on the road, but they're wildly different experiences. So while there are things I'd really like to see in that regard, I don't know if my thoughts and opinions would be useful, or if it'd just be overkill and not something the everyday user would find intuitive like I do. But anyway, this is way too long. I appreciate y'all listening to my ramble on RPG Stories. I hope it was some kind of useful and let you know what it has in store, what all it can do and what it was like. I think it's an interesting project for sure, and there's so many things that I did not cover because it'd make the video even longer than it already is. Again, I encourage you to watch the stream, probably on Avenue Studios where the audio wasn't messed up, so you can see how it does in the actual play. Read over the Kickstarter real good and look at all the stuff they plan to add. Hop on Steam and look through all the previous updates they've already pushed out so you can get an idea of what you're getting into. I'll have all the links for the stream and the Kickstarter in the description, assuming I remember. Knowing me, I probably didn't. And of course, the shout out today goes to Brave Alice Games themselves for making the software to begin with, providing me and my friends some keys to play with, setting up and running a session for us, always being available when I have a question, and generally just being some decent folks. It's a shame you're all the way over in Greece, otherwise we could go have a drink or something. Now, as of writing this, their new Kickstarter for the Wrath of Devs update is about 60% funded in just the first 48 hours, so here's hoping they hit the mark along with all the stretch goals and continue to make the VTT they dream of. Squirrel out!